Straight to a news alert. Just in brand new images coming in from the West Bank, this appears to be clashes likely between Palestinians there and Israeli defense forces. Just remember, in the West Bank, there are various zones. There's area, Bay Area, says some are in Israeli military control. Others are in Palestinian military controls. There are multiple checkpoints you come in and out of controlled by the IVE, depending on the level of security in that area. I myself have been in an area like that, caught in a crossfire in moments. Palestinian youth, Arabs, can take on a checkpoint. I think that might be part of what we're seeing in the West Bank, remember. The West Bank is a separate portion than what you see right now on your map in the Gaza, You might want to plug in a map for the West Bank and they're hours ahead of us. So this is what we fear here in America. Our world is on alert because Hamas is threatened this global day of jihad today, and it happens to be Friday the 13th, the Feb is warning Americans to be vigilant. Major cities are on alert. I know New York is Chicago, you have Philadelphia, you have in Europe, they're feeling the same way. The synagogues have a security here in New York and all over the country. And this guy, they were saying, a former Hamas chief, but we have someone on him, Michelle, she said he's still very actively involved. Asking protesters to take to the streets to deliver a message of anger in support of Palestine, and that's what we're looking at now. So when we people talk about a two-state solution, it's Gaza and the West Bank. Good luck with that. That'll never happen again. Our Secretary of State is going to the West Bank to meet with Mahmoud Abbas today and pretend as if he's an ally or give an opportunity to stay out of this. When you talk about a two-front war, Pete, as you walk these streets. A two-front? Yeah, Hezbollah and Hamas. Can you imagine a war in which a rocket fire or gunfire starts coming from the West Bank at Israelis? They'll be thoroughly surrounded. Absolutely, this is likely Rallah. I'm almost sure that's Rallah, which is the capital of the Palestinian Authority of Fatah in the West Bank, and you see crowds retreating from what was likely a riot, a clash with police, and if you're an American, you're not only concerned of what's happening there. But this same thing has been called this day of rage to happen in the States as well, and so the question is, how are police going to respond to this? We know all of NIP has been called in. If you have a uniform, you've been told to put the uniform on to be prepared for anything, by the way. Over the last few days, you saw riots up in support of the Palestinians, Hamas. Don't sugarcoat it. It is terrorist Europe. Supporting in Spain, same thing. We saw the same thing riot. We see these clowns over at these colleges from Columbia to Harvard all in support of the Palestinians. And now we understand too, I'm watching online in Jordan, right by the West Bank, where their borders West Bank, they are rioting around there trying to get in, and then we also saw pictures, I understand. We have video in the control room of Yemen, who is obviously fully supported by the Iranians. The Houthi rebels are in charge, allied with the Iranians, and they are writing and taking him as a call to show your support by having a day of jihad. So that is indeed happening, but overall we are a I know. Most of all of us are pro-Israel. Most of our country is pro as they should be, and I know that France has been pro-Israel. The Eiffel Tower was lit in blue and white, and do you know that the president of France is telling everyone in that country, you are not allowed to protest and have these pro-Palestinian protests. We will not allow that in France. So obviously there's a split here in the country, Peep, because you want to respect civil liberties. But as I noted to you, because I went to a protest yesterday, it's supposed to be worse today. You have people that are openly confessing and calling for jihad. And I think it's important to note. These are the same folks, jihadists, that attacked us here in New York City. These are the same folks. That Iran is funding these are our enemies as well, same ideology. Lawrence, Hamas equals ISIS a Hamas equals Al-Qaeda saying worldview. This is also a big moment of clarification. It's one thing to have looked at the Israeli so-called Palestinian-Israeli-Arab conflict over decades and have a nuanced view of it right. It's another thing to protest. After what Hamas did killing innocent civilians, specifically targeting the youth and the elderly, and the innocent to defend that and to riot and protest in that and deny. That is a revelation of the underbelly of this party, which is rooted in Islamism, which is rooted in a supremacy over the West and over Jews, and you have to have it clear it's hard to fight that, because children, I've seen these videos online of what they're teaching their children. How to hate Jews, how to hate Americans. How to hate anyone who doesn't have their belief, their same belief, and so it's hard because they've been indoctrinated at a very young age. Their parents believe it, their grandparents believe it. Everyone in their neighborhood believes it. So that's all that they hear, they're just immersed in it. So you know, how do you fight that? Yeah, we're going to be covering this all morning. If you're just now joining the program, you're looking at live of the West Bank, where protesters are clashing on this day of Rajah. This is happening all across the country as well as international. We have team coverage of all the unrest related to the war in Israel. Mark Meath is live outside of the White House on how the Fidi and law enforcement are preparing for this global day of jihad. Apparently, Mark also have Trey Yanks, too sorry, God as well just saw him up there. He's alive in Israel, all right. Yeah, let's go to Trey Yanks right now. Trey Yanks is, as you know, on his way to check out the area and around the Iron Dome. And Trey, you're hearing sirens. Oh, we're not hearing sirens here. But we are getting alerts on our phone right now, and this is significant breaking news right now. There are air raid alerts sounding across northern Israel. So this means one of two things. It means Hamas inside Gaza has fired a long-range rocket toward northern or it means that they are firing from southern Lebanon. We will wait to see what information we can gather right now, but I just want to show you on my phone here. All of these are rocket alerts that just came up over the past several seconds in northern Israel. This is an area just to the east of the city of Haya, the third largest city in Israel, and it gives you a sense of where these attacks are taking place. It's not just in southern and central Israel, but this entire country is on alert, and I'm seeing just coming in right now, according to Israeli media, Hamas is claiming responsibility again. We do not know if this was fired from Gaza and it was a long-range rocket or if it was fired from southern Lebanon. But Hamas is claiming responsibility for the rocket fire into northern Israel. All of this comes as we do have some new reporting for you this morning. I'm told by a diplomatic source that currently inside the Gaza Strip, whenever the Israelis are warning civilians, either with a roof, knock, stir, or with a text message that their building is going to be destroyed, that there are some instances of Hamas stopping civilians from leaving the building. Now this was confirmed to me by a source on the ground in Gaza. Sinai then reached out to Hamas for a response. Here's what they had to say. This is absolutely wrong. This is not our decision. This is not our policies, and it is also technically and logistically impossible. How can you prevent 1.1 million Palestinians from leaving their houses or homes from site to site if they want to do it? This is impossible in the past. Hamas officials have lied in their statement, so we should note that I also spoke with this senior Hamas official in Gaza about the civilian casualties that we saw with our own eyes in southern Israel, and he said that they did not happen, but this is significant and I want to know. This is different than the evacuation order that Palestinians received overnight, which is a general evacuation order from the northern part of Gaza. The Israelis are giving Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip just 24 hours to evacuate. That's 1.1 million people, an indication that Israel is likely preparing to go in on the ground tray. What percentage of the Gaza Strip believe in Hamas and share their ideology and think this is okay? So look, there are two major political parties in both Gaza and the West Bank. You have Hamas and you have Fatah, both have military wings, and both have the ability to fire rockets. The second largest group inside Gaza is Islamic Jihad. All of these organizations don't always get along, but I can tell you that I've been inside Gaza when there has been rocket fire, and just as an observation. There are often groups of people cheering when the rockets are fired from the Gaza Strip, but we should note there are more than 2 million people in Gaza, and many of them fear Hamas. They are very afraid about what's happening right now, and I've spoken with the average Palestinian in Gaza, who said this week to me that this was a horrible thing that happened. The slaughter of Israeli civilians, so it's a mixed bag when you talk to Palestinians, but there are many inside Gaza that support Hamas. It's how they got elected back in 2006 to run the Gaza Strip. But at the same time, there are many women and children there who are also quite frightened about what's taking place, and we do know the death toll is rising each and every hour. Hey Trey, we're showing images right now in the West Bank. You have laid out very well Hamas's control in Gaza. How is the power balance between Fatah and Hamas in the West Bank? Who actually controls the ground were there to be a decision to strike Israel even more from the West Bank? How much power does Hamas have? That's a great question in terms of a governmental power. F controls the entire West Bank. They're led by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in the city of Rallah. But there are towns and cities in the West Bank that basically are under Hamas rule when you drive through them, and we have done just that on the lamppost. You see green Hamas flags, and just a few weeks ago, Fox News had an exclusive in-bed with the Israeli army in the West Bank, and we went to the city of Tehran. It's a city that sits just on the border of Israeli territory, and as we were there, the Israelis were engaged in a gun battle for hours. We had to take cover in a civilian house. The Israelis were firing from the kitchen window, and ultimately they killed one Hamas militant, and again this is in the West Bank. There are thousands of militants in the West Bank, and so far they haven't been activated to launch any sort of wide-scale attack throughout the year. They have launched a series of individual attacks, but it's a major battlefield for the Israelis, and it's part of the reason you've seen an increasing troop deployment, not just here to southern Israel, where we see the tanks and the apps preparing to go into Gaza, but also in the West Bank. The security situation is boiling here, and there's a real understanding that what's happening here in the south could spill over into the West Bank. So Trey, I guess the big question that you know nationally, internationally, they're calling for this day of jihad. When you talk to Hamas officials, what are they expecting folks to do? And as you look at the West Bank, you can see one of the Hamas flags in the crowd. What do they call their people to do during this day? They're calling for acts of violence. And it's incredibly dangerous as it relates to the broader Palestinian cause. We talked about this earlier, but I've spoken with friends in East Jerusalem Palestinians who say this was the worst thing to happen to the Palestinian cause in the history of their people, because they understand that the average person who's watching this from afar may not understand the nuance between Hamas and Fatah. They may not understand the nuance between the average Palestinian who works alongside Israelis in a city like Tel Aviv, for example, and they may associate all Palestinians with Hamas and the brutality that took place against the Israeli civilians in southern Israel on Saturday morning. And so it's a very dangerous cause, and it's a gray area, because you see university students in the United States protesting before Israeli civilians are put in the ground and buried. And when you look at this as an observer and you look at those individuals, they either don't understand what they're protesting and what they're supporting, or are being apologetic for the massacre of civilians. And this is important to understand. And if you're at home watching all of this unfold, it's important to know the difference between Hamas and the average Palestinian. There are many Palestinians that live in the city of Tel Aviv. Where I live, they work alongside Israelis. They are friends with Israelis. They go to the beach, they're average people, but Hamas militants can give them a bad name, and so if they don't make a clear distinction about what's happening here in the south, and that massacre of more than 1,200 Israeli soldiers and civilians and those that were taken captive into the tunnels of the Gaza Strip. It's an information war that's happening parallel to this ground war and this op southern Israel Trey, also know in the Jewish tradition. They want to bury its tradition. To bury the dead immediately, sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong the next day, right? How are they handling this when some of them, don't have the bodies of their loved ones, or everything's in political unrest, or there's so much unrest? How do you bury someone? How do you arrange the synagogue and all of that when everything is it's a war zone? It's a great question, and I want to talk about the funeral process here, and I'm going to describe something a little bit graphic for a moment. So I just want to warn our viewers. Yesterday, when we were at that music festival site before everything erupted and they chased down this Palestinian militant, we watched as Israeli officials from an organization called Zaka stood there and dug through the debris of burned bodies in the ground. Civilians, people who were attending a music festival. They were picking up the burned pieces of humans because, as part of Jewish tradition, you have to bury all of a person. And so that is what they were doing at that site. And we've seen similar sites throughout southern Israel at different massacres that took place by Jewish tradition. They do want to bury us as soon as possible. And so it's an agonizing wait for so many families, as they don't know if their loved ones were taken back into Gaza or if they were slaughtered and just haven't been found in the communities along the border. And remember, Israeli troops have not made it to all of the areas along the Gaza border because it's too dangerous to get to certain spots. Just based on this massive attack that took place on Saturday morning, and tomorrow will mark 1 week since the massacre took place, and still we have this tense situation in terms of funerals. Both civilian and soldier funerals are taking place, and a lot of them are taking place at a location called Mount Herzl in Jerusalem, and there have been so many funerals that they've had to stagger them, and they can't bury them the same day. So every 30 minutes, officials are showing up with a body to bury them and give them respect. And there was a sad thing that I read about this morning about a lone soldier. A soldier who was from abroad, who came here to serve in the Israeli army, and his family couldn't make it because the massacre took place, and now so many flights are canceled to Israel, and local people were calling on anyone who was in Jerusalem, who had time and was able to go to the cemetery at Mount Herzl to arrive. Because there was no one at this young person's funeral, just a tragic event, and it just gives you a sense of the families, especially those who are abroad, who can't make it or find their loved ones, can't get into Israel, how they must be mourning at this moment. Gosh, yeah, we're also seeing some unrest over in Yemen because of this call by Hamas to show solidarity with the terrorists. You're not able to see this. I'm not sure if you're monitoring the Kara, but there's a huge protest there. The all big Palestinian flags or Hamas flags. So shouldn't be a surprise. Their government is now fully supported by the Houthi rebels, which are supported by the Iranians, which is part of the conflict and friction between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So we'll keep an eye on that. Should that unfold? We also heard, Trey, that in Jordan, right by the border, Jordanian police are trying to control what could be somewhat of an aggressive riot in support of what Hamas is calling for. And you have to wonder, in a country that's small, you don't know where your enemy is on. Correct, absolutely. And we saw those images earlier today of Jordanian authorities firing tear gas at demonstrators that approached the border with Israel. Traditionally, there are not protests along the Jordanian border, and that gives you a sense of just how much. This is igniting. The entire region, we should note, it was once described to me by an Israeli official, a defense official in Tel Aviv, who said the Iranian regime is like an octopus. It has tentacles all over the Middle East. So the threats that are facing Israel don't just come from Gaza and groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but they come from Lebanon and the militant group Hezbollah that has thousands of precision-guided missiles all aimed at Israel. We've seen the classified documents. The former defense minister, Benny Gantz, showed me a map. The Israelis had identified all of the locations, and it's a serious threat. As the general noted earlier in the show, it would overwhelm Israel's missile defense system. The Iron Dome, but again, it's not just Gaza, it's not just Lebanon, it's Syria. Already this week, we've seen mortar fire from southern Syria into the Golan Heights. The Israelis responded with artillery. You mentioned the Houthis in Yemen, supported by the Iranian regime. You have Iranian-backed Iraqi Shia militias in Baghdad and the surrounding area. You have the Iranian regime itself that has long-range ballistic missiles. This is a widespread threat. Earlier in the week in Egypt, a police officer slaughtered 2 Israelis who were on a tour. And so the entire region is erupting right now. Internally in Israel, there's tension in East Jerusalem in the Shat refugee camp, just outside of Jerusalem. We saw clashes a number of times this week between Israeli security forces and Palestinian youth. There have been calls in larger cities in the West Bank to take to the streets. And so far, it's not as widespread as officials worry about, but they have to brace for this possibility, especially amid these calls for a global day of jihad.